千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. There are often questions being asked about the difference between Zen and Tao. Understanding of those two terms are usually vague, a little fuzzy. So I get asked those questions as well, and it doesn't help that those terms are not that well defined. Now, Zen Buddhism is, I'll just start by giving you one particular view of it, and then we will see more examples as we go. Zen Buddhism can be seen as the fusion of Buddhism and the Tao. Many concepts are similar, although they may go by different names. So originally, it was just Buddhism. And before that, when the original Buddha lived, an Indian prince who lived about 2,500 years ago, roughly around the same time that Lao Tzu lived, but in India, he was an Indian prince. He renounced his heritage. He decided to practice spirituality, and he taught spiritual truths about the Great Awakening and enlightenment to his followers. So that was the original Buddha, and that was from 2,500 years ago. At the time, there was no Buddhism because there was just the teaching of the Buddha. So now, of course, ever since the passing of the original Buddha 2,500 years ago, there's followers of his teachings that became Buddhism. So that ever since that time, it's been passed down from generation to generation. And this person that you see here to the right of the slide, that's Bodhidharma. He was the spiritual leader of Buddhism in India in his time. And he decided to travel to China to spread the teaching of Buddhism to China. So when he was there, he became the first great patriarch, the first teacher and spiritual leader of the Zen Buddhism tradition. So I want you to get the historical context that Buddhism came first. Then about 1,000 years after Buddhism had started in India, Bodhidharma visited China, and the fusion of his teachings and the Tao created Zen Buddhism. So the beginning of Zen Buddhism was roughly 1,500 years ago. Zen is actually a Japanese term. It's a term that we know well. We see it all the time, but it's actually Japanese and not Chinese. In Chinese, it is Chan. So Chan is Chinese for meditation or the meditative state. When it transmitted from ancient China to ancient Japan, that's when the term was translated from ancient Chinese to ancient Japanese. That's when it became Zen. And then from Japan, the concept of Zen spread to the rest of the world, including the West. And that is the reason why we know it as Zen Buddhism. So for Mandarin speakers, it's simply Tan Buddhism. Okay, so let's talk about the story here. Bodhidharma and the emperor. So this is obviously a significant point in history because we're talking about the beginning of Zen Buddhism here. And in Mandarin, we will call it Canzong, the Zen tradition. So Bodhidharma, this Indian monk who was the leader of Buddhism, is going to China to spread Buddhism. Now, in appearance, he is, as you see here, you can tell in this depiction in the slide that he looks quite different from the Asians, from the ancient Chinese who looked remarkably different. He was darker complected. He wore this faux beard. Now, his eyes were described as green in color. He was oftentimes, he had another name, the green-eyed barbarian. So he might have come from India, or, and there's another scholarly investigation that said he might have also come from Persia or parts in between, at some point between India and Persia. Ancient Persia was known to the ancient Chinese as Fūzǐ. So so the Bodhidharma is commonly recognized as being Indian, but there's a minority of scholars who thought he might be Persian. Either way, he's definitely not Chinese. He looked very different. He looked much more Caucasian than Asian, and he was greeted with a lot of reverence, a lot of respect, including the emperor of ancient China at the time, Liang Wudi. So let me take a moment to point to the characters below. You see a whole bunch of Chinese characters right below this. 达摩祖师与梁武帝. So the first four characters, 达摩, the first two characters, 达摩, that's Bodhidharma in Mandarin. 祖 means ancestor, 师 means teacher. Together, it's patriarch or spiritual leader, spiritual teacher, and he was the first leader of Zen Buddhism. Therefore, he is 祖师, 达摩祖师. And this character, the fifth character here, this character here in the middle is the character for and. And then Wu Di, that's Liang Wudi, is the Wu emperor of the Liang dynasty. That's what that means. So when Bodhidharma reached China, most likely from India, it was news that the emperor received with a great deal of excitement and joy. Because you see, the emperor was a follower of Buddhism himself. So he lived roughly 1,500 years ago. So about 1,000 years after the time of Lao Tzu. Buddhism itself transmitted or spread from ancient India to ancient China several centuries after the time of Lao Tzu. So by the time of this particular emperor, it had taken roots in China for quite a few centuries. So this emperor was known as being very intelligent, and he studied the Buddhist sutras. He practiced the teachings of Buddhism. So he did many things that the Buddhist teachings advocated. He also advocated a vegetarian diet back in his days. He was very progressive. So he was a big fan of his spiritual leader. He regarded Bodhidharma as his personal spiritual leader. So he invited the Bodhidharma to visit the imperial palace right away. And once the Bodhidharma got there, the emperor could not wait to sit down with the Bodhidharma to discuss Buddhism. So the very first thing that the emperor said to Bodhidharma was the following. He said, "Ever since I ascended to the throne, I have built numerous temples and published countless sutras. So, Master, how much merit would you say I have accumulated? Now, in asking this question, the emperor was fully expecting that Bodhidharma would be impressed. He was thinking to himself that in Bodhidharma's travel through China to reach the imperial palace, he had already seen the many temples. He had already seen for himself that Buddhism was spread far and wide in China. So Bodhidharma should be impressed. And therefore, he was expecting that Bodhidharma would praise him. He was used to being praised because of the huge amount of work that he had decreed should be done. And some even called him the Bodhisattva Emperor, and it was a label that he regarded with much pride. Because of this, because of the way he thought, where his head was at, he was absolutely shocked by the answer from the Bodhidharma. He asked the Bodhidharma, Master, how much merit would you say I have accumulated? And the Bodhidharma contemplated this question and responded, no merit at all. The emperor was like, what? Wait, hold on one sec. Something's wrong here. That can't be right. Because, well, the Bodhidharma did not even say something more moderate, like, well, you've done some good work, but it's not enough. You need to do more. Or you've accumulated some merit, but that's not a whole lot. You need to do more. Something like that. You know, something like that you would have expected. And he might say, well, Master, I simply need to work harder and spread the teaching even more. He was not expecting this complete negative answer. No merit at all, zero. So he asked, he's perplexed, and he asked, why? Why no merit at all? The Bodhidharma said, he explained, what you have created is in the material world. Therefore, it is positive karma in the material world. The temples, the sutras, these are things in the material world. The material world is ultimately elusive. So these works that you have done, ultimately elusive. It is like the shadow following you. You see the shadow and you point to it. You think that, yeah, there's something there, but it's the shadow. It's actually nothing. It is actually nothing of substance. So what you have done in the material world with the temples and the sutras, like a shadow. The shadow is the projection of an object blocking light. The material world is like a projection of the ultimate reality of the spiritual realm. There is actually nothing. Now, this is at a level above the emperor's understanding, although he was indeed a very intelligent man. So then, wanting to probe further, he asked, so, Master, what would be the real merit then? So Bodhidharma responded, he said, pure and clear wisdom that is wondrous, emptiness in the self. That is the true merit. It is not something to pursue in the material world. Now, let's also understand one thing. This ancient emperor, like most other emperors, was prideful, had an ego, which is why he loved the title of the Bodhisattva Emperor. So out of this, everything that Bodhidharma had talked about rubbed him the wrong way, as you can imagine. So he's thinking, well, wait a minute, I know something about this Buddhism stuff that you're talking about. Okay, well, I'm pretty accomplished. I've learned a few things as well. I'm gonna put you to the test, Master. I'm gonna turn the table around on you. So the emperor asked, sort of like a quiz, what is the foremost meaning of the divine truth? What is the highest teaching of the divine? What is it? Again, the Bodhidharma surprised him. He said, in the vastness of existence, there is no divinity. What did he mean by that? Well, the Bodhidharma truly understood the Zen and the Tao and the spiritual truths. He knew that in the unifying, underlying Tao of existence, there are no distinctions like the divine and the not so divine, the royalty, the nobility, the commoners. All of those distinctions fade into the oneness of the great unity. He knew this and he spoke the truth to the emperor. But then when he said there's no divinity, the emperor thought, whoa, wait a minute. Aren't you the most divine spiritual leader of Buddhists everywhere, including myself? So why would you even deny the divine nature that we all respect and revere within you? That doesn't make any sense. So the emperor said, he was so perplexed, he said, no divinity? Well then, who is the person sitting in front of me? The Bodhidharma said, I do not know. Again, demonstrating that he was at a level far beyond the learning of the emperor. So by this time, the emperor knew that he was shown the wisdom, and yet he was completely unable to digest at the moment. He was not a happy camper at that time. The two of them parted company in a way that was neutral at best, that was rather cold. And the story of the Bodhidharma actually continues beyond this point. You see, Bodhidharma, after leaving the imperial palace, went into China and eventually ended up in this forest, Shaolin. There's a temple there where he saw that the monks were rather weak, so he taught them exercise. And that, combined with China's previous martial arts tradition, gave us the Shaolin Temple and the Shaolin martial arts. But that's another story for another day. For now, we have to focus on this. We have to focus on why the Bodhidharma talked about the lack of merits. You can tell because he was the founder of Zen Buddhism, and he was also the founder of Shaolin Kung Fu, that this was an extraordinary individual. This was an incredible person, amazing person. So while he taught everyone the Dharma, what in Mandarin we will call 佛法, he understood the underlying spiritual teachings, which was actually connected to the Tao. So now I want to draw those connections for you. I want to make it more explicit. I want to bring together Zen Buddhism and the Tao in the way that he understood it, using the story as a launching point. So in the story, the emperor supported Buddhism with the intent to accumulate merits. Therefore, he had no merits at all. This is all the more true because the emperor didn't have to do anything to construct the temples or to print or copy the sutras. He only needed to say, let it be done, do it. He only needed to issue a command, which is easy for him to do. So no merit at all. The Bodhidharma was so right. So in the Tao passage that we're studying, what does that correspond to? This is a demonstration of low virtue. 下德不失德，是以无德. It means that low virtue never loses virtue, meaning never losing sight of virtue. You always want something in practicing virtue when you are at the low virtue level. And that is why it has no virtue. Or in the words of Bodhidharma, that is why it has no merit. So there's a total connection between the two, a straight line between the two. If you do good deeds with the purpose of accumulating virtues, you will end up with no virtues at all. Okay, so that's low virtue. What about maybe high virtue? True merit. This is the wording of the Bodhidharma. True virtue or true merit can only be attained with the emptiness of the self and letting go of attachments in the material world. How does Lao Tzu say the same thing? 上德不德，是以有德. High virtue is not virtuous, therefore it has virtue. So with the emptiness of the self, there is no specific particular awareness of doing something virtuous because it is just natural. Letting go of attachments in the material world so that you can practice and focus on the spiritual side of things. In other words, if you do good deeds because they flow naturally from you and not because you want to score some kind of points, then you will accumulate real virtue. That is the conclusion. That is the meaning behind the story that I call Bodhidharma and the Emperor. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.